In case you've been living under a rock, AUKUS stands for Australia, UK and US. It's our combined defence partnership, primarily focused around, in the first phase, providing submarines to Australia. And before we get to that point, when they're received in the early 2030s, we're going to have the US and UK submarines rotating in and out of Perth to establish a stronger defence. The Australian and WA governments plan to invest around $8 billion by 2033 to expand the HMAS Stirling, WA's fleet base west, and the associated infrastructure. So a lot of money getting spent. WA policymakers view AUKUS as a chance to diversify our economy beyond mining, which is going to be really great to give us a strong, stable, consistent industry that we haven't had. One of the most immediate effects of AUKUS in WA is going to be the heightened demand for housing in Perth's southern suburbs. So the influx of defence personnel, construction workers and support staff's already being felt in areas near the naval base.
Welcome to Perth Property Insider, where you will learn how to grow your wealth and improve your life using Perth property. Our show is brought to you by Investors Edge Real Estate, the highly rated and award-winning property management, sales and buyers agency servicing the whole of Perth. Now, here's your host, Jared Mann.
G'day and welcome to another episode of Perth Property Insider. Today I'm taking a deep dive into what the massive AUKUS project means for Perth. I'm taking a look at the economic outlook over the next 10 years and how this is going to affect property in Perth as well. So it's going to be a very interesting episode, and the impact on Perth is going to be significant and definitely worth covering today. So let's go inside. Now, in case you've been living under a rock, AUKUS stands for Australia, UK and US. It's our combined defence partnership, primarily focused around, in the first phase, providing of submarines to Australia. And before we get to that point, when they're received in the early 2030s, we're going to have the US and UK submarines rotating in and out of Perth to establish a stronger defence, start training up our support crew and maintenance crew, and getting familiar with the overall platform ahead of time when we will have our own submarines provided to us. Things firmed up after looking a little shaky over the last few months with the transition to President Trump, and it's now looking like it's all going ahead. So I thought it would be an appropriate time to look at exactly what this means and what the impact's going to be. So this partnership is set to inject billions with a B into Western Australia economy over the next decade and establish a new defence industry hub in Perth's southwest. So the Australian and WA governments plan to invest around $8 billion by 2033 to expand the HMAS Stirling, WA's fleet base west, and the associated infrastructure. So a lot of money getting spent. How does this all sort of look? Well, the expansion is creating around 3,000 direct jobs in construction, engineering and specialised trades on that base, with hundreds more in the supply chain and support services. In addition to that, there's a $12 billion federal down payment was announced for cutting-edge naval shipbuilding precinct at Henderson. So $8 billion going into HMAS Stirling, the fleet base, a further $12 billion going into a naval shipyard precinct in Henderson, and that's expected to support a further 10,000 direct jobs over the next 20 years. So massive project for Henderson there, with massive impact on jobs and our economy. Now, these include roles in building and sustaining submarines and surface vessels, reflecting a major expansion of WA's defence industrial workforce. So with a record defence spending, WA is going to definitely benefit. Its broader economy will definitely benefit. And local contractors in civil construction, logistics, and high-tech manufacturing are gearing up for a solid pipeline of 2 to 3 billion per year in works over the next 10 to 15 years. So importantly, WA policymakers view AUKUS as a chance to diversify our economy beyond mining, which is going to be really great to give us a strong, stable, consistent industry that we haven't had. So WA's Premier has even hailed the new Henderson submarine precinct as a game changer that could rival the resources industry as a pillar of growth and employment. So massive. So while the scale of AUKUS is smaller than mining, so the mining industry currently employs about 135,000 people as of 2024. I mentioned above about 13,000 direct jobs coming about over the next decade. So about 10% of what's currently involved in mining is looking to be involved in the AUKUS-related jobs. So the AUKUS program, while it's not on the scale of the whole mining industry, probably a bit concerning if it was to that sort of scale, 10% definitely moves the needle. And because it's a lot more stable type of spending, it's really going to stabilize the overall economy. So government officials are emphasizing that up to 70% of spending will go into sustainment and maintenance over the decades. So that's going to inject tens of billions into the WA economy and create ongoing skilled jobs in engineering and technology. So that's the encouraging part. So when it comes to the infrastructure development, that is a major component because they have to gear things up at both HMAS Stirling off Garden Island and upgrade. So they're upgrading the wharf extension. They're going to add new maintenance workshops. They're going to add training facilities. They're going to improve the power and waste management to support the nuclear-powered submarines. They're going to build a small nuclear waste facility and an uninterrupted power supply on the base to safely steward these submarines. So then, I guess, outside of the base, local infrastructure is then going to need to expand. So plans are underway for improved roads, revisiting Garden Island Highway link, and community facilities to accommodate the growth. When we start looking at neighbouring areas and how that's going to impact them, the city of Rockingham is positioning itself as a defence-ready hub, leveraging its proximity to Stirling Naval Base and Henderson. So Stirling Naval Base will be 10 kilometres from city of Rockingham and 25 kilometres to Henderson to attract related administration, innovation and training centres. So they're really gearing up to try to get as much of that economic pie as possible. And in fact, the Advanced Defence and Maritime Training Centre in Rockingham has been proposed to upskill local workers and complement the federal programs to train WA's workforce. So they're going to do partnerships with TAFE and universities as well, but they're aiming to put that Advanced Defence and Maritime Training Centre in Rockingham itself. So that'll definitely add to the local area there. And overall, Perth's economy is going to be poised for a significant defence-led boost. So the AUKUS submarine program is going to be Australia's largest ever military acquisition, where they're spending up to $368 billion nationally by 2055, and Perth's going to be at the forefront of that. So very exciting for Perth. So between the base expansion, which I've mentioned, the Henderson precinct that I've mentioned, there's well over 20 to 30 billion could be invested around Perth in the coming decade, supporting thousands of high-paying jobs. I've mentioned there about 13,000 jobs. So very interesting. And it's going to be a sustained stimulus that's likely to spill over into all the other sectors like manufacturing, engineering, hospitality, retail, because, there's going to be the families that come along with these workers too, and they're going to have jobs and they're going to need houses and they're going to spend money in the community. So very widely impacting on, just how far into the economy this is going to affect. And crucially, unlike a mining boom that ebbs with commodity cycles potentially, the defence spending is locked in by government, committed, and a bipartisan support is given, offering Perth a more steady growth trajectory. So that's going to be a good stabilising factor. Now, let's take a look at which property suburbs are going to probably be most impacted and what could be suburb hotspots that are going to see greater benefit than others. So one of the most immediate effects of AUKUS in WA is going to be the heightened demand for housing in Perth's southern suburbs. So the influx of defence personnel, construction workers and support staff's already being felt in areas near the naval base. Real estate analysts are flagging Rockingham and its surrounds as property hotspots poised to benefit from the submarine program. Key suburbs to watch include Rockingham, Safety Bay, Waikiki, Shoalwater and Baldivis, all in that coastal corridor south of Perth, within easy reach of HMAS Stirling and Henderson shipyard. Rockingham is the closest city to the base, and adjacent coastal suburbs are expected to see an influx of AUKUS-related workers and families, boosting that demand for rentals initially and then homes to buy. So in these suburbs, vacancy rates are already very tight, despite there being, quite a lot of investors that have moved into there over the coming years. So I think it's going to really tighten up things even further in the next couple of years ahead and certainly beyond. So very, very interesting. Already Navy personnel in that area contribute to the rental market, and I guess that AUKUS expansion's only going to add to that demand, adding specialist contractors and support staff. And so one report has identified that there could be as much as 24,500 new dwellings that may be needed nationwide to house AUKUS workers, with a significant share of this being in WA's naval corridor. So Defence Housing Australia's responding by expanding its footprint near HMAS Stirling. They've currently got 640 properties and are planning to double its Rockingham portfolio within 5 years through new construction. And hundreds of new homes are already slated. About 550 houses in Baldivis and nearby suburbs will be built specifically for Australian Defence Force families, taking the pressure off the open market. So that's still a very small drop in the ocean. They're certainly going to be adding some and catering to it. They're in talk of redeveloping local sites, for example, the old beachfront pub and a former caravan park, into housing for defence staff.
Just real quick before we continue on with the episode, are you getting my email updates yet? If you're not, you're missing out on our suburb intelligence reports, which we tailor and prepare for your individual suburbs of interest, showing advanced stats and insights. Must get onto those. And I also send out exclusive invitations to our events, including webinars, sundowners, and workshops. So if you're not getting those, head on over to investorsedge.com.au/join and make sure you're receiving my email updates.
Now, for property investors, what this means is that Perth's southwest corridor could see above average capital growth and rental yield improvements in the years to come. So if you've got a property down there, I'd say this is a great bonus that's going to layer on top, that's really going to supercharge the area, and I'd be keeping the property unless you've got a really good reason to sell and it makes sense as part of your overall strategy too. Eastern States investors have noticed these submarine suburbs, with interstate buyers actively targeting Rockingham and surrounds since late 2021, with the expectations that AUKUS projects will ramp it up. So it's likely to affect house prices, likely to keep increasing rents, and it's likely to put pressure on new areas being developed and new land getting released. So I guess I would be looking at the more established areas where there isn't that supply that's going to keep coming on. But I think you'll find that even in areas, I've been fairly critical if you've been a long-term listener of Baldivis, but I think just now understanding the size of the impact of this project, I think the demand in that overall area is going to outstrip the supply no matter what they look to bring on. So very interesting game changer. Now, noticeably, the Henderson industrial area in the city of Kwinana Coburn will also attract workers. So that many of these are likely to commute from the same southern suburbs. And Henderson itself is mostly industrial, if you're not aware of it. So there's also some nearby other suburbs that would likely benefit, such as Coogee, Munster, Port Kennedy. They could see indirect benefits. So that whole area is going to be very attractive for both the people moving in and wanting to live there, as well as investors wanting to ride this wave. So there's going to be a real sort of dual demand from the Navy and the shipyard, and that's going to reinforce the investment case of Rockingham and its coastal suburbs. Local businesses, as I mentioned, stand to gain with shops, cafes, services. So that's going to uplift commercial property in the area if anyone owns commercial property down there. However, stakeholders are definitely cautioning that there's going to be growing pains because it's an already hot market, as we know. If this overheats things further, it's going to make the affordability issues even more challenging, and the WA housing supply is already struggling to keep up with the population growth. We're at a record low, tightest market ever in history. And now we go and put this AUKUS strain on. So even though I've been approaching this with a fairly positive tone for property owners down that way and for the investment opportunity, the other side of that coin is just how difficult it is for people to find a house to live, and the growing pains of getting access to infrastructure and amenities, and for the government to provide those in a timely fashion, and for all the families when they need to move and find a rental and what they need to pay for rent, and for a house when they find something to buy. It's all very difficult. So it doesn't come without its challenges, but overall, you'd have to say it's going to be very positive for Perth and our overall state. So when we're potentially looking at a surge of 10,000 workers and their families coming to deliver AUKUS, the state and federal governments acknowledge the need to invest in supporting infrastructure, not just housing, but also schools, health services, transport in the communities. And plans are in motion to address these needs. For example, there's funding studies for road upgrades and constructing mass transit links to the area. So the bottom line for property investors, I think, is that the Perth southern coastal suburbs are emerging as a high demand pockets thanks to AUKUS. Rockingham, Safety Bay, Waikiki, Shoalwater and Baldivis feature affordable prices, I guess, relative today, especially when we compare the prices to the northern coastal suburbs. And you'd have to think that this is going to be a real game changer for adding extra demand to them in the coming decade. So, bit of a timeline here for AUKUS and the investments in WA, just so you can understand the impact and how it's going to roll out. We're expecting the immediate actions are enhanced naval activities commenced. We've got HMAS Stirling that's going to begin receiving more frequent visits by the nuclear-powered submarines. We've already started to see that. We've got federal funding starting to flow with initial works, planning environmental for Henderson precinct. They've been funded already over the next 2 years. WA government's also launched its training and incentive programs to grow a skilled workforce. So that's already begun as well and was announced this year. And then from this year going into the next couple of years, construction's going to ramp up with the major construction at HMAS Stirling kicking off. They were aiming for it to kick it off this year, so we'll see if that happens. I don't think it's happened yet. This includes that expanding the wharves, building the new workshops, upgrading the base facilities, and starting that $200 million submarine training facility. So that's going to be a critical piece to the training and getting everyone up-spec'd, up-trained and ready. So they're preparing already for the massive upgrades. They've got the dredging plans in place, the design of the dry docks, etc. Then to sort of 2026 onwards, we've got visits from the UK and a workforce build-up. So we're going to have the Royal Navy submarines are scheduled to start periodic visits to Perth, adding to the US Navy visits that we've already started to see. And the submarine rotational force West framework is then solidified, and they're going to have rotational deployments of allied subs into WA commencing that following year. So that's going to really then require things to step up with the hiring and training peak over 2026. Hundreds of Australian Navy personnel and technicians are going to be trained at home and abroad. So that's when a lot of that's happening. 2027, the rotational submarine presence begins, and HMAS Stirling will host a permanent rotational presence of nuclear submarines, up to 4 US Virginia class and 1 UK Astute class sub at any time. So, geez, potentially 5 submarines parked off of HMAS Stirling. So that's a major milestone, dubbed the SRF West. It marks the first time nuclear subs are going to be based year-round on Australian soil. To support this, a contingent of 1,200 US and UK military personnel, plus their families, will be stationed in Perth. So many are going to live on the base, but others will integrate into suburbs around Rockingham, and hundreds of new houses on the base and town are going to be built to try to accommodate it. So by late 2027, it's going to expand the wharves and facilities, and Stirling is expected to be operational, enabling maintenance and repairs there. Then going into 2028 and 2030, the Henderson precinct construction is going on. So that'll be under intensive development. Independent planning suggests roughly $25 billion investment over that time period. And, that's good. There's going to be a lot going on there with the new dry docks, the shipbuilding, support facilities, contingency docking, lots of stuff going on. So they're going to be able to then build smaller naval vessels like the Army's landing craft and possibly the frigate blocks to keep the submarines supported. So they'll see continuing growth in the local subcontractor businesses and supply chains feeding these projects, and firmly establishing Perth South as a defence industry hub. And then got a few other sort of major milestones here, so try not to get lost with me. Early 2030s, we've got the Australian first nuclear submarines arrive, where we have our own, slated to receive its first nuclear-powered submarine, the Virginia-class boats purchased from the US in those early 2030s. And then we'll be geared up by then with the Henderson precinct to service our own fleet. So the second East Coast submarine base is being planned out. But WA is going to be the focus on ramping up for the full cycle docking of nuclear subs at Henderson. Now, when it comes to 2035 and beyond, there's then going to be the ongoing development. It's worth noting that the 2040s will bring further expansion with the new AUKUS designed submarines built in Adelaide to enter service. And Perth will then host an even larger fleet, possibly additional infrastructure upgrades to support them. And going into that next decade, the foundations will be laid for an even larger naval base. So a world-class shipyard, very large naval base, growing population of defence personnel. It's expected to basically entrench Perth as one of Indo-Pacific's key naval hubs, and a status reinforced by the continuous presence of US allies and local know-how gained through AUKUS. A lot going on in there, and very interesting, and going to have a very big impacts on the area. So, in summary, there's going to be a lot of capital, a lot of jobs, 13,000 odd jobs just over the next 10 years. No, over the next 20 years, 13,000 jobs. Big impact you'd expect on those coastal southwest suburbs. The government's certainly gearing up and going to be trying to support it with amenities. I think they're going to put a lot of focus, a lot of money into it, but things always seem to lag. I think it's a great opportunity for investors there. Anyone that owns a property there should be keeping it if they don't have a great reason to sell. And happy to be wrong on certain things. I'm going to wind back my negativity on Baldivis. Even though there is a lot of supply coming on there, this demand seems like it's going to outstrip that. But I'd still choose a more established suburb if I was looking to buy into the area. And while we don't base all of our investing decisions on this, we use our trifecta method to select areas. This is a great bonus and certainly something that's going to drive demand and keep things stable for the economy down there. So hopefully this has been insightful for you. It has for me. I've enjoyed doing the research on things. If you've enjoyed this episode, like and share it with friends, and give us a review. I always love to get feedback, and thanks for tuning into the show. Catch you on the next one.
Just a reminder,
The information discussed in this podcast is general in nature. As we don't know your specific situation, you should always seek professional advice before taking any action. For free market reports on your suburbs of interest and other helpful resources to grow your wealth, make sure you join my property investor update at investorsedge.com.au/join. And finally, make sure you're a member of our Perth Property Investment Facebook group to be part of the conversation with other like-minded investors, get help to your questions, and get a feel for what's going on out there in the market. I'll see you in the group.